Hey, I'm Guy.
I'm John.
It's our YouTube channel. Subscribe to it. Give this video a like.
Podcast below in the description. Subscribe to that as well and share with your people.
All right, John, we have news. Jimmy Garoppolo, it looks like, is a long shot to play. My words, not the official words, but you read this and you tell me what it means. Ian Rappaport writes, sources, Jimmy Garoppolo suffered a chipped bone and torn ligament in his right thumb. His status is in doubt for the weekend. He's going to try and get it out somehow. He'll be reevaluated on Wednesday. So the first story, full disclosure, we re-recorded this segment because when we started our emergency podcast, it was sprain. When we started the YouTube video, it was sprain. Now it's chipped bone and torn ligament in right thumb. The play it happened on was a sack with 3:56 left in the second quarter, if you want to go find it, by Danico Autry. And he hits him hard. He gets his hand in there on Jimmy's right hand, and he slams him to the ground. That does not read like an injury of a quarterback that's about to play.
I think unofficially Jimmy's season's over because it's his throwing hand. It's a major finger on the throwing the football, right? You know, the mallet finger, some of these guys that have come back, you do have 4 fingers of your just normal fingers and then your thumb. But your thumb is the only...
I don't know if I would call a pinky a normal finger.
True, and as a football, it doesn't have to be on, but you're definitely your 3 fingers, but your thumb is the only finger on the other side of the football. So if his finger is compromised / in major shambles, we've seen several quarterbacks, Jared Goff, Drew Brees a couple years ago. Like I think it's fair to say that Jimmy's done. And I also think it's easier if this had happened after the Titans win. Let's say they had beaten the Titans and Jimmy had played well. I think this would be a pretty big gut check. Right, because you're like, God, Jimmy had been playing well. We would have been 9-7, or excuse me, 9-6. We would have been right there to make the playoffs. But this, I think everything changed. And maybe it changed because his thumb didn't work, and he threw that bad pick, and he just looked off. That makes sense. But I think it's just time, and it might. I mean, I don't expect him to play, but I don't want to say that Niners lucked into this because you don't root for anyone to get injured. But I think this has a chance to play out. It just worked out pretty perfectly for them to get their young guy some reps at the end of the season.
Right, if Trey Lance is better than Jimmy Garoppolo. Because once you've committed to trying to make the playoffs, you should kind of make the playoffs. Not making the playoffs and only getting 2 games of Trey Lance at the end of the year is not an ideal. I wouldn't call that lucking into it. Yeah, but, I mean, you're right. That reads like a guy who's trying to gut it out. Less than 100%, Jimmy Garoppolo. You know, it's not like we're starting with one of the great quarterbacks in the NFL. And we are starting with a guy that has accuracy issues at times. So that would be a major problem in a game that you really cannot afford to have mistakes in. Now, going to a rookie quarterback in a game you can't afford to have mistakes in is also dangerous. But he played the rest of that half. They threw a couple passes at the end of that half. And then, like you said, the first pass of the second half was a wobbler. It's one thing if you're missing a couple practices because you're in the COVID protocols or because you're letting some swelling on your ankle die down, even though we've seen that be an issue for him, right? An ankle was why Trey Lance had to play this year. But on your throwing hand, you can protect, I think, in some ways against a rookie quarterback. If you're Kyle Shanahan, right, you do things to help him. There are things that you would just have to ask Jimmy Garoppolo to do. You have to trust that it's not going to be a wobbler coming out of his hand. And I'd have a hard time seeing Kyle Shanahan go into this game as Trey Lance is having the best month of practice of his career, air quotes, young career, right? Like this is happening right on the heels of Kyle Shanahan saying Trey Lance looks incredible in practice, on the heels of Matt Mayoko writing that he's carving everybody up. So I don't see how this recipe ends in Jimmy Garoppolo starting at quarterback for the Niners. On his throwing hand,
well, Guy, while Jimmy doesn't throw go routes, like they're not the 2018 Chiefs, they're not the 07 Pats. They do push the ball down the field, right? Because he's 5-7 steps dropped behind the line of scrimmage, and they throw deep ins, they throw crossing routes, even some of their, the deep out, even some of their slant routes that hit fast. He has to put a lot of, velocity on the ball. They are not. I wouldn't call them a dink and dunk offense once they start heating up the last 5 weeks, would you?
No, because they throw a lot of tight window throws over the middle, right?
Yeah. I mean, Debo kills everyone over the middle, and so does George. So if he can't throw, throw 80%, I don't see how it's possible, especially when you drafted a guy who was known for throwing ropes. Now, we talked about it after the Arizona games, that he has to figure out how to, use the velocity at the right times. But to me, I think we've seen the last of Jimmy Garoppolo as a 49er, which is pretty crazy that his career ends on that game. Now, I also think it helps them a little bit because I thought after that game, under no circumstance would anyone trade for him $25 million. You start putting it out there. I mean, he's legitimately hurt. Hey, I'm injured. That was the Jimmy Garoppolo that you saw the previous 6 weeks. That's me. That wasn't me. I got thrown to the ground. I'm still pretty valuable. Hey, Giants, I just saw you playing with Jake Fromm. Hey, Heineke, Ron, you want to have your own players fighting each other, or do you think I could help you out? Because I go back and forth. I go, no one's touching them. But you watch some of these teams. Now, here's the problem. Overall, the main part of this story is he's hurt again. So it's like, could you commit $25 million to a guy that, he's got hurt multiple times this season, coming off a season when he was injured. He gets hurt. He gets injured a lot, man.
It's part of his story. And if he doesn't play another snap for the Niners, it would be in some ways poetic that his career ended with the Niners with an injury. I also think part of it's like,
do you expect him to play another snap for the Niners? If you just obviously educated guesses right now, we don't have that besides some tweets.
No, I think what it would require, I do think Trey Lance is going to have to play well-ish, because even if they lose this week, they'll probably be in a must-win. I mean, that would put them in a must-win situation. Sorry. Even if they win this week, it's going to feel like a must-win situation week 17. If they lose this week, it will definitely be a must-win situation. So there's a scenario, right, where Trey doesn't play great. They lose to the Texans. Jimmy's not 100%, but he's better the following week. And you go, all right, here we are. What do we do now? Well, we try to make the playoffs. We think Jimmy gives us a better shot. That would be a scenario where he plays. But this does not feel like he's not going to be throwing the ball better than Trey Lance any of the next 2 weeks from practice. Like,
can't be. Yeah.
Cannot be. So I think a lot of it does depend on, does Trey just look solid? Does he look like, okay, we need to get this guy out there again next week?
Because wasn't part of the Trey Lance story that when he hurt his finger in the preseason game against the final preseason game against the Raiders, one of the things Mayoko said is that carried with him, and then he had to start relatively earlier in the season, and his finger wasn't totally healed. And I think it'd be easy to laugh at, but I do think we have a pretty good amount of evidence. It's kind of random. A lot of starting quarterbacks have hurt fingers and thumbs the last couple of years, right? It clearly, you just play Thanksgiving or Christmas Day catch with your son or your brother. If your fingers hurt throwing a football, it'd be a problem. Like, I'm not trying to diminish. Like, if Jimmy's has a torn ligaments and cracked bones, like, I'm sorry, it's not possible. Like, if that was Tom Brady, how would he play? It'd be hard.
Well, he'd play if, he might play, right? Like, he might play if, what's his name? Garrett Gilbert was his backup quarterback, or Nate Sudfeld was his backup quarterback. But if Trey Lance is your backup quarterback, right? Part of this is what's my alternative? Playing you hurt or playing the other guy? Well, the Trey Lance alternative looks pretty good right now.
Yeah. And part of making the trade for Jesus so it's pretty bad. Like, I mean, they're
now, Schefter UCL tear, which
I thought that was in your elbow, but
in his thumb, I guess multiple UCLs. I'm not a doctor, and a fracture.
Was part of making this trade and keeping Jimmy was like, hey, listen, we're going to give him a redshirt year, but we also have a contingency plan for a guy that's proven in several of his seasons with us. Before the Super Bowl and after the Super Bowl, he gets hurt. And it literally happened this season before the thumb injury when he couldn't play against the Arizona Cardinals. So I go back, like I do wonder if he never plays another game, given how much money he has, just based on his injury history alone, because he definitely has games that the Giants, the football team, we can go around the league, they would die to have. I don't know how he has much value, just given that the guy's always hurt. If he was healthy and kind of a roller coaster ride, I'd be like, there's too much money in the league, salary cap's going up. I just think if me and you were leading a personnel discussion, The number one thing I'd tell the guy running like the remote on the overhead projector is like, tell the intern, like, hey, can we bring up his injuries in the last 5 years? It's a long hell in New England. Remember, Tom got suspended and he couldn't even make it all 4 games because he got slammed on his shoulder against the Dolphins.
That's how Jacoby Brissett got his chance.
Yeah, it's how we learned who Jacoby Brissett was. So, I don't think his career. Obviously, it's not over, but he's had. I mean, we say this sometimes. He's had one of the most unique careers I've ever seen in my entire life in any professional sport. And he's still got he's got years to go too. Like,
yeah,
he's got some more moments of like, oh, Jimmy,
Well, if Nick Foles had a moment. I don't know if you saw Nick Foles played well the other day in Seattle, and Jimmy's going to have moments. But I think your point, and I agree with it, is you can never go into a season relying on him if you're trying to win to be your starting quarterback.
There's a good question. If the money's equal and it's not going to cost, obviously Foles does not cost what Jimmy costs, but if they're both free agents, who would you rather have as your backup quarterback, Nick Foles or Jimmy Garoppolo?
Probably Garoppolo.
I do think Jimmy's still a starter, while Foles is not. But you watch that game with Foles, you're like, if this guy had to start a couple games, like next year, Trey Lance, wouldn't you want him as your backup quarterback?
Absolutely. I think Foles as a backup, in particular, just based on everything I hear about the guy, is just an A++++ guy. It's not a bad option.
Jimmy's not a backup right now. Even this.
No, he's better. Yeah, he's better than that right now.